Be big, B23. Be big, B23. Be big. Be big. So I'll start up here. You stay off screen and I'll bring you up. I don't see Dan here. Is he here? All right, we're going to kick off the show. Does everybody have their two samples, the first two we're going to start with? Well, I don't care if you have them. Do you not have them? Excuse me. Do you not have them? Paul Senta. So we need some samples over here. I need mine. So we need two sets of samples. Two sets of samples. Okay, let's kick this thing off. Welcome, everybody, to the Big Bourbon Club. I'm Steve Higdon. Most of you have been here more than once, many, many times. Anybody here that has not been to an event? So we've got welcome. Anybody here that's not a member of the Big Bourbon Club? Well, we can fix that really fast. Get it right, Hal. Don't pull your hamstring going to find them. So welcome. We are excited to bring to you Diageo today. Doug Craigle is the national brand educator for all Diageo brands in North America. Doug's going to come up in a few minutes, and we've got 5 tastings, and we're going to have an incredible night with Doug. Doug, thanks for doing this for us. We appreciate it. So just a couple of things. Upcoming events, we have a Heaven's Door presentation like this Saturday, June 1. Make sure your calendar is free if you can join us there. We have our virtual tasting at Limestone Farms on this Saturday. The samples have already gone out, but everybody else is welcome to participate. You're just not going to have samples. And it's going to be a great event. It's free for you, and you're going to learn about one of the new up-and-coming dynamic distilleries in Kentucky. So we're excited for that Saturday. We're creating a new event that I haven't talked about yet, and that is on June the 2nd. June the 2nd. Travis, your ride's here, I think. Sorry. June the 2nd, we're going to go out to Limestone Farms in Georgetown. We're going to do kind of a behind the scenes before they're open to the public. We've done this before once at Heaven's Door. So that'll be posted on the app very soon, and the tickets will be available probably this weekend. So pay attention to that. Couple of other thoughts. If you have never seen one of my TikTok bourbon reviews, raise your hand. So if you've never seen it, just raise your hand. Don't ask me questions, just raise your hand. I don't mean that disrespectfully. I'm teasing Lisa. I'm teasing. So let me tell you something we're doing that's going to be, I think it's a big deal for us. And we're spending a lot of money on it, and it's going to be a big deal. And that is, we are scrubbing, thank you, we're scrubbing all of the videos out of TikTok. And I am putting them all on my website. Now, the way we put them on the website is we will upload those into YouTube. So on YouTube, we'll direct link it to the website. So on my website, bigbourbonclub.com, there will be a new menu bar that says Bourbon Reviews. and they'll all be there, categorized, very easily to find. So if you've never seen them and you're interested, they will be there, and also on YouTube. One of the things we want to do is grow YouTube. It's going to be here forever. TikTok, who knows, who cares? They have limited what you can do on there with alcohol so much, it makes no sense at all anymore. So I was lucky that I got on before they started limiting that. But we're going to put it on YouTube. We're going to put it on the website. So that's a big endeavor. It's a big deal. I hope in a few months we'll be ready to go. But we're working on that every single day. And that idea came out of what we call our Facebook committee. We have a committee of 6 Big Bourbon Club members. That any other members of the committee, Travis is on it as well. Ed's on it in the backs, but we have a lot of members that are not here. But Glenna, thank you. Glenna takes minutes to all the meetings and participates. So we've got some great stuff coming out of there, and that's one of them. Number 2, raise your hand if you do not know what our Ambassador Club is. So most of you do. That's okay. Most of you do. But the Ambassador Club is where you invite friends using a link from the app, and if they join, you get credited with points. And every quarter, Brian, that's 3 months. It's a calendar quarter, so that's January through the end of March. That's my old business partner. At the end of every quarter, we tally up all of the points that people have earned by how many referrals they get. And the winner gets 3 bottles, barrel pick bottles. Number 2 gets 2, number 3 gets 1. The end of the first quarter just happened, and Hal Ginsberg won it. So Hal, you get 3 bottles. Thank you. You know, if you don't know Hal, he's ecstatic right now. Don't be confused by the dull face and the lack of reaction. He is ecstatic right now. But he gets 3, and we're glad for it, Hal. Thank you. We'll quit texting me at night about it and see where your standing is. Deb Copeland. Deb's not here, but she's a local. She came in 2nd, and Tom Morrow up in Michigan came in 3rd. So get on there, and on the website, on Big Bourbon Club, if you go to the Ambassador tab, you can actually see the rankings every week. We update those. So they're live and updated every Monday morning, and you can actually pull your name out of there and see where you stand if you're not in the top 10. So it's very cool, and we would encourage you to get involved with that. Lastly, before I turn it over to Doug, is I've mentioned this before. Come on in, Dan. Come on in. I've mentioned this before, but Bourbon Plus magazine, it's one of the top print magazines, if not the top print magazine in the industry, in my opinion. But I'm also their official Bourbon Club partner. They're my official media partner. And I've mentioned this before, but we get 2 pages in every edition. This is not paid. This is not an advertorial. This is actual. This is an interview I did with 3 small startup distilleries. They're not all small anymore, but read it, get it. And if you want to get it, there's a 25% discount code if you're a big member. And it is BBIG, B-B-I-G, B23. It's in the newsletter. It's in the app. But if you join, you get 23% off. Okay? So with no further ado, Doug Cragel, the head of brand education nationally for Diageo. We're going to have a great time. Come on up.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Do I sound? Oh, wow. All of a sudden my mic's on and I sound the same as you do. This is fantastic. It's magic. It's very nice to see you all. It's great to be here and talk a little bit about American whiskey. Like Steve said, I have been the national educator for American whiskey for Diageo for going on 12 years. I've worked and collected whiskeys along the way. In fact, I got my start working very specifically down at the Cascade Hollow Distilling Company, working with Dickel. If anybody knows that brand, we've got a couple we're going to taste today. But I've been privileged enough to be working with the Stitzelweller Distillery and Blade & Bow since its inception in 2015. Trying to learn my range here. All right. So that's a really important part about what I think is special about Blade & Bow Kentucky Straight Bourbon. So as we go through this tasting today, understand that at the end of the day, this whiskey is a new to world whiskey, right? 2015. It hasn't been around that long. But the privilege that I feel every day, every time I go out to Shively to the Stitzelweller Distillery and get to walk around there, take folks on tours, and just honestly just hang out and work from there because it's a privilege to do so, I realized that there is this opportunity to pay respects and have a reverence for a lot of stories that aren't ours, right? The Stitzelweller Distillery opened Derby Day 1935. This was the merger between W.L. Weller and Sons and the Stitzel Family Distillery coming together post-Prohibition. One of the first new construction distilleries to open post-Prohibition in the United States. And what I think is so interesting about that is that when you think about those two companies independently previously, one of the names you've probably heard of for sure, right, in W.L. Weller and Sons, which was the #1 sales force in the country when it comes to selling spirits, right, and selling whiskey, and Stitzel Family Distillery, which was all barrels. The idea of supply and sales. Now, after Prohibition, everything changed, right? They decided we were going to set up this whole structure. So essentially, you can't cheat the taxes. You have insulation between the way that these things are sold. And the structure completely changed. Before Prohibition, it was the salespeople that owned the brands. This is what I find to be fascinating. I mean, we talk about whiskey all the time. Y'all hear people talk about, this is how you make whiskey, this is how you do this is how you do that. But when you think about this place, as we get into it, this is what I find to be fascinating. The salespeople own the brands. So then they would go to whoever, whatever person was manufacturing a good that they could then put into that bottle to sell to you. And they were the ones that owned it. After Prohibition, everything flipped. Right? Now, all of a sudden, we have a 3-tiered system that says that the supplier, the person making it, owns the brands, and then the salespeople is the ones that have rights to be able to sell it in an exclusive area, and then they sell it here or to your favorite shop, and then it gets to you. Right? That's how it all happened. And so that shifted everything, but they were ready for it. Right? W.L. Weller and Sons, of course, had, the opportunity to merge together with everything from Julie and Pappy Van Winkle, who worked for them at 19 years old as a salesperson, right? To, as they came together, you had Will McGill, who was the first ever distiller to work there at that distillery. You had Alex Farnsley and APH, or Arthur Philip Stitzel, all coming together. So you had finance, supply, production, sales minds, all coming together to create this place, which is why I lovingly, and a lot of people consider Stitzelweller to be kind of like the foundation of bourbon, right? Or we call it the cathedral of bourbon. It's this idea that a lot of the practices that came out of this place, brands like Cabin Still, Rebel Yell, Old Fitzgerald, right? These are all the brands that they were their flagships and the pinnacle of its production, all coming out of there. And they were setting concepts of how we looked at bourbon, right? The original boom when it came to American whiskey started with these concepts in the US. We fast forward, unfortunately, for whatever reason, and I invite all of y'all to come and see this because one of my favorite parts about the Stitzelweller Distillery is the fact that we're not like every other tour. There's a lot of tours out there where essentially what you're going to do, which I love, almost every single bourbon tour I've ever been on, right? I think they're all amazing, and I love the tourism that we have in this state and everywhere across the country. But there is a formula, right? It's all right, here's our brand, here's our name, you see it when you pull up, and then it's, here's how you make whiskey, here's how we make whiskey, now drink our whiskey, right? Boom, boom, boom. And usually it's you walk around, you hear these things, you sit down, you taste it, you're done. So at Stitzelweller, what we try to do is things like we have a progressive tour where you're gonna, because a lot of the distillery is actually shut down, we want you to taste along the way. And the stories that we're telling, some of which aren't ours in the first place, but we have the privilege of talking about them, where the stories that we're telling are essentially opportunities to talk about the decline of brown spirits in the US, right? Because what happened, for whatever reason, and whatever we want to contribute or say is the reason why people stopped drinking whiskey in this country. Some people are going to say it's vodka in the Cosmopolitan. Some people are going to say it's drugs, which probably is true. Some people are going to say it's the Vietnam War, right? When you have a whole generation that is rebelling against their previous generation and everything they did, and their parents drank whiskey, so I'm not drinking whiskey, right? All of these things, right, set forth this idea that people stopped drinking bourbon in the US, in whiskey. So the Stitzelweller distillery actually shut down in 1992. And it wasn't until 2015 that there was any whiskey being made on property, right? It was mothballed except for warehousing. And so those are the stories that we try to tell at this distillery. These are the things we're inspired by. So the first whiskey that we actually have is in Blade and Bow is just that, right? It's stories like that that inspire a brand, but they inspire new to world brands, right? It's not a person's name on the front of the bottle. We've got some of those, right, to drink afterwards. But that's the beauty of this industry today, is that there's so much diversity in what we're doing, and especially new to world whiskeys. This is inspired by history, brought in a new way. Blade and Bow is the anatomy of a skeleton key. On every single one of these bottles, you've got a key, right? And so that's the blade, and right there, the ornate handle is the bow of the key, right? This one actually happens to be a 5-key, surprisingly enough, which is the rarest one to find. We'll talk about that in a second, but it's called that because when the distillery opened, Derby Day 1935, they hung 5 keys on the front door of the distillery. And it was a symbol of the 5 steps of making great whiskey, if you haven't heard this before. Grains, yeast, fermentation, distillation, and maturation. That was that symbol. But more importantly, it was actually a symbol of hospitality within the bourbon industry, because these were the physical keys to the building. So every single day, they would unlock that door and hang the keys right on the front of the door. They don't exist anymore. Someone stole them a long time ago. But that was a symbol of the 5 steps of making great whiskey, but it's also a symbol of hospitality, trust in the community, right? Like you're just leaving your keys out on the table and at the bar, right? Like you're like, okay, I trust everybody in this room. I can leave my wallet sitting here and go to the bathroom. It's fine. But that's what that is. It's trust in your community when this distillery ran. And that's a huge part for us and for Blade and Bow when it comes to what we're doing. Cool? And of course, I welcome questions as we talk about all this. And I also really find, I do this a lot. I mean, it's cool enough to have a job where I'm a whiskey educator by profession. But I do find that if I don't ask people to drink whiskey in the first like 15 minutes of talking, I get real boring. So I think we should pick up the first glass of whiskey, right? So hopefully you followed all of the great folks that work here at Joe's instructions to keep number 1 on the left and number 2 on the right. Yes? Perfect. Yeah, because there's not a lot of color variation, so you're going to have a real good nose otherwise, right? So if you pick up the first one on the left, this is going to be the Blade and Bow Kentucky Straight Bourbon. Like I said, this is a whiskey that is crafted around history. It's crafted around stories. And in fact, it was inspired not just by these stories, but it was actually inspired by the fact that when Diageo became Diageo, which people ask this all the time, it's like, when did they buy Stitzelweller? Well, it's never that simple when it comes to bourbon distilleries, right? I travel the country, and of course, this would be the insert some related joke that none of us want to hear that live here, but out in the rest of the country, they like to make those jokes sometimes. But the idea that it was mergers and acquisitions, right? So it was essentially from a company that owned them and the sale to another company to the merger of those 2 companies to become another company and so on and so on and so forth until they got to this place. But Blade and Bow is crafted around some of the last remaining bourbon that was distilled at this place before they shut down. That's what we're inspired by. That's how we decided how we were going to make this whiskey, was at first thinking about this old whiskey. So we had in our possession whiskey that was distilled, bourbon that was distilled at Stitzelweller before 1992. And we had an option. We had a choice to make, essentially. It was like, all right, do we take this? And we already had this lever to pull in our company, which was called the Orphan Barrel Distilling Company, if anyone's heard of those. One-off releases of super old whiskey that you can buy for $300-400. A couple people get it, and then it's gone, right? I actually went to Total Wine not too long ago, and it was like, buy one, like one person only, or whatever it is, right? Like you go to a place and it's like, you can only buy one because there's only 3 of them in this area, whatever that may be. It's a great idea, and it's fantastic, but that's not what we wanted this whiskey to be. So we wanted to find a way to preserve it. What we landed on was something called a Solera method. Anyone familiar with Solera? A few, excellent. Everyone that's not, think of it this way. Tiered fractional blending system. This is what I tell bartenders when they have to try to answer what's the Solera method in like 15 seconds across the bar. Tiered fractional blending, right? It's coming from the sherry industry. This idea of blending barrels downward in order to allow whiskey to intermingle level to level, to stretch out the older stuff, create consistency, complexity, and preservation. Because as that stretches out and as you pull away, as long as you don't pull more than 50% of those barrels, the older stuff's going to stick around. It just gets a little thinner, but everything else ages with it, and they all intermingle together. So that's what the Solera does for us. It gives us the opportunity for this whiskey, in my opinion, and go ahead and try it if you haven't already. Honestly, if you've already picked up the glass and I just kept on talking, I just forgot to ask you to try the whiskey. Yes?
Question about the number 5
Mm-hmm.
over there 2 weeks ago. What is it about the number 5 that makes it a little bit rare? Because I was able to find it.
You were able to find one?
There's like 4 shells, but I found it.
So the question is, what is it about the number 5 key? I mentioned that this one happens to have a 5 key, right? Every one of these bottles has a key on it. Every one of them's numbered. And in fact, when it comes to skeleton keys, it's you count the negative spaces in between the teeth on a skeleton key for its number, right? So there are 5 negative spaces here on the teeth of this key. It's the least manufactured of all of our keys that we put into the pool to put on by hand as we hand bottle every single one of these, right? And so what we want you to do is collect all 5. You take a photo of them, you send it in to us at our website, and what you're going to be able to do is become a member of the 5 Keys Club, right? So our 5 Keys Club is very specifically a place where you're going to get your name engraved on a julep cup that sits on a shelf at Stitzelweller. You can come and see it, whether it's you want to come and visit it or whether you'd like to take it home. You can take it home with you. If you'd like to grab that julep cup, have them rinse it out because it's probably a little dusty if it's sitting on the shelf. Take it upstairs to the Garden and Gun Club that we have, the cocktail bar at the distillery, and get them to make you a julep in it. You can do that too. Or you can just take a selfie with it, put it back, keep on going. But out of those keys, it's the hardest to find. You will find occasionally where a couple of them will pop up as 5s together in a group, because the thing about it is these are all in a bag. Actually, they're hanging on a tube at our bottling line, and there's 3 people that sit there, and as the bottles come off, they put them on by hand, put the cork in it, and then the machine puts the foil on top, right? So every single one of these keys is placed on these bottles by hand.
So Doug,
Yes.
we've got a question up
Okay.
here. Bill, are you ready? And we're going to bring up Tessa Walbrook. Not yet? All right, who are you bringing up?
I got a vocal question. What state outside of Kentucky do you sell the most bourbon?
Ooh, what state outside of Kentucky do we sell the most bourbon? For Blade and Bow in particular, I would actually say that it's usually fighting between North Carolina and Georgia. For Blade and Bow, there's an argument to be made on a larger level when it comes to what are the other states outside of Kentucky for bourbon. I call the 4 corners of the whiskey world to be essentially this idea of like Illinois, New York, California, specifically San Francisco, and Louisville and Kentucky, right? As like these are the spaces that you can go and have the highest volume. So that's a good question.
So let me ask you first, and then I'll take questions. Give us your thoughts on the Blade and Bow. What did you get on the nose? What did you get on the palate?
So this is 91 proof, right? As far as the proof's concerned. Mash bill, I like it. So this is where we get into the interminglings of this idea of a Solera system. We cannot pinpoint, because of how whiskey's going into the top and how they're sitting and resting level to level, exactly what percentages are when it comes to that. You mentioned 4 grade. So historically, Stitzelweller Distillery is very much known to be a distillery that produced wheated whiskeys, where their flavoring grain was wheat as opposed to rye. And so with that comes the assumption that our oldest whiskeys that are going into this is going to be a wheated bourbon, while what is going into it now primarily, which is so much of the bourbon world today, is going to be a rye flavoring grain. As far as anything we're sourcing, as well as all the whiskey that we're making at Stitzelweller currently to go into the top of our system.
We just drank number one we're talking about.
So it's not a matter of, it's not that we're switching from a wheat to a rye specifically. It's really that we were going after what we're making at the distillery is typically a 70-20-10, which is a similar ratio, but we are, because so much of what's available on the market that we were using to source from has been a rye flavoring grain, that's what we've stuck to. And really, one of my biggest things when it comes to these absolutes that we consider when it comes to bourbon of like, do you stick to a mash bill because the integrity of these numbers that we've written down somewhere, or do you stick to the flavor profile? And if you have shifts in a system like this, I do this because I'm assuming there's a generated, we're going to generate an image of some barrels behind me later. It's going to happen. Right? So this idea that in a Solera, so the top is the youngest, the bottom's the oldest. Yeah. And so that whole concept there's a lot of things out of your control. And so really blending is that finishing moment, and it's really just about flavor profile. That's something that, at least for me, absolutes when it comes to whiskey, and we'll talk about this with some of the other ones. I don't like proxies for quality when it comes to bourbon. I like the idea of our perception of what we're tasting and making sure we deliver consistently.
Okay, let's do this. Before we get into the profiles, we've got a virtual question from Tessa Waldrop out of Shelby, North Carolina.
Howdy, howdy. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
So my question is, like I am I'm a brand new bourbon drinker. And I'm just wondering, do you have any recommendations? What brand would you suggest for somebody like me, a newbie, a toddler?
Can I bring this closer? Well, that's it's a fantastic question. In all seriousness, one, I do think that Blade & Bow is a very easy drinking whiskey. So this is a great entry point with some heritage where you can kind of dip your toe into some things people talk about a lot when it comes to bourbon groups. You're also in North Carolina, right?
Yes, sir.
It's a big city. You might have, I don't know if you heard earlier when we were talking about some of the number one states for Blade & Bow, but North Carolina is typically one of them, no matter what the control board does. So I think it's perfect. But after that, what I would say is that, try a lot of bourbons. In fact, I think less about brand and I think more about how you do it. For example, like this idea that you can get a bourbon, don't be shy to order it at first with soda or on the rocks or with the water back. You don't have to dive in head first into the deep end, neat pours only.
Hey, Doug, hold on. I've gotten to know Tess in the last 3 months. She drinks it neat and only neat and higher proof. So just the opposite of I'm telling you, she's become an athlete overnight.
Okay.
No soda, no low proofers.
All right. There you go. See, it sounds like you've got some excellent guidance, right? And I think that this is a great entry point as well, though, in a lot of ways. There's complexity to this whiskey. In fact, that's one of the things for me, as we talk about the flavor profiles and everything else, is that my favorite part about this particular bourbon is that our Solera system allows it to me to drink like an older bourbon and smell like a younger bourbon.
Nice.
As far as the flavor profiles, right? Yeah.
All right, Tessa, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dean Sampsell, question in the back of the room.
Yep. That's a great question. With with the 22 year, it's not a Solera at all. That's the difference, right? Being the sense that we're talking here, this guy, our flagship, this is the Solera. It's also a non-age statement whiskey because it has to be. Because in this finishing system, a Solera system, tiered fractional blending is a finishing system. The second we take whiskey out of a barrel and put it into this system, the clock stops, right? That's why we protect these barrels. That's why they do everything they can to repair them, to make sure that they are treated with care so that, that we can keep that time ticking along. And this system means non-age statement. So 6 years old is all we can do. It doesn't do it justice. The youngest going into this system, right? The youngest is 6 years old, right? The oldest was 21 when we started in 2015. Granted, they're all still sitting in oak as well, right? So now the barrels are older, but still.
Let's jump into the profile of Blaine Bow. What did y'all get on that? Leather. James? You got a honey. Raise your hand if you've had Blaine Bow before tonight. Raise your hand if you have never had Blaine Bow before tonight. So probably only a third of the room have not had it. If you have not had it, tell us what your thoughts were on it. What'd you get off of it? Did you like it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Derek, what's that? What'd y'all think? What other profiles? We got leather. We got honey. Caramel. Honey and caramel. Thank you, Ben. What about the finish? I thought the finish was actually longer than I was expecting. I've had it once before. What about the finish? I thought it was warm and long. It was good. Did you all think so too?
Not fruity. Yeah. I mean, that's where the nose for me is, I get a little bit of some grain aromatics on the nose. Now granted, we're also, an ounce in a 3 ounce cup, right? But I think that you can get a little bit there. I encourage you to add some water to this guy as well, just to see if you want to pull some aromatics out of it, what's going to open up. But I agree with everything. Of course, I agree with anyone's tasting notes, honestly. You can tell me whatever you want. And I'm like, I love that for you. This is perfect.
All right. Any other thoughts on the Blaine Bow before we go to number 2? And just for the record, I have a 6 o'clock flight in the morning, so let's pick this up a little bit.
So, hey, that's my fault.
I'm not talking about Doug. I'm talking about you.
Listen, anyone that knows me when it comes to my tours, my presentations, and everything else, I get it. Like, I've been doing this. I like my job, so I get excited and I just start talking. So, and I've got some really fun things to talk about with these whiskeys. So,
Well, that's
I will try to keep it
why
on.
we're paying you the big money to be
Keep
here
me
tonight.
going. Keep me going.
Well, actually, we didn't pay him anything, but
You're paying me in whiskey.
thank you.
Yeah, there we go. So with the next one that we've got, we put these two side by side because it's the idea is that the Stitzelweller Distillery is the home of Blaine & Bow Kentucky Straight Bourbon, but it is also in a lot of ways kind of the rest of our American whiskeys. It used to be the Bullet Frontier experience at Stitzelweller right before they built Bullet Distilling Company out in Shelby County. And as they moved out and had their own facility, Blaine & Bow got more space, but we also have brands like Orphan Barrel I mentioned, as well as I.W. Harper. Now, I.W. Harper to me is another really fascinating brand with a lot of legacy and heritage that has a kind of similar situation, not exactly, but I.W. Harper was one of the biggest brands of the 1950s, right? I don't know if you knew this.
You get him on video.
What's that? I.W. Harper.
No.
So it started in 1872 by Isaac Wolf Bernheim, right? And in fact, he came from Germany. And what he did, just a little backstory on him, because I think it's pretty interesting. And we know the name Bernheim, right, in this area for sure. But he came to the United States to get a job in the cotton industry. By the time he got here, the war had ended, and there was no job for him. So the boat took too long. He showed up, and they're like, sorry, no job. So but he was an entrepreneur. And what he did, he had like what was the equivalent of like $2 in his pocket. He bought a bunch of trinkets and somehow borrowed a horse or whatever he did. He went on horseback from New York across northern Pennsylvania, selling elevated lifestyle items to farmers in rural, like folks in those areas. So from his beginning, what he did was he found ways to convince people to buy things that they didn't need, that they don't, not necessarily, like, it's not going to help their survival, right? To buy a fine comb or a mirror or like these things when you're a farmer in northern Pennsylvania. But what it was convincing people to take a moment, right, and be like, it's worth spending money on yourself. And that actually translates all the way through to this brand that he created. He moved, eventually stabled his horse, moved down to Paducah. That's where he felt like he actually wrote an autobiography. So anyone that's like a history nerd when it comes to bourbon, it's like a public domain autobiography. I got it off of some university's website as a PDF. And he was actually turned a good phrase. Like, one of his quotes was, Southern hospitality wasn't just an empty phrase. And he learned that in Paducah. And he fell in love with the South in Paducah, Kentucky. And there was a distributor that worked there, and he knew how to do math. So he started keeping their books. But he wanted to be a drummer, a salesperson. So they're like, if you want to be a drummer, you got to find someone else that can math, right? And take your place. So he wrote to his brother, who came over from Germany, took his place as the accountant, and he moved on to be the salesperson. Eventually, they started their own company with some investing and started Bernheim Brothers Distilling Company in Paducah. Moved up to Louisville, had a shop on as 201 Main, right? So Whiskey Row, right by 2nd Street. It's an interesting storefront because when they got too big in that location, they sold it to this small sales group called W.L. Weller & Sons, who was smaller than they were at that time, right? And they moved out and opened a distillery at 17th and Breckenridge. That distillery is still there today, although it was torn down and rebuilt. But the way that I.W. Harper just permeates through, and Bernheim permeates through all of these brands. That's what's so fascinating to me. What's fascinating to you all is drinking the whiskey. So, just like Blade and Bow, I put these two together because one of the things I consider to be this category of American whiskey is what I call traditional innovation. So that's the idea that we're taking the traditional methods of making bourbon and we're doing something to it. This one is the same way, right? So the linear idea of what we know the steps are to make a bourbon. We used a Solera method, so a fractional blending system post the clock on that whiskey, finishing stuff. Same thing here, traditional innovation. But this is a I.W. Harper Cabernet Cask Reserve.
Oh, that's not sweet.
There you go. Wine barrel finishing, right? That idea now to us, especially in Kentucky, it's been around for quite a while, right? We've had some pioneers here in the state that have definitely brought wine barrel finishes to the world in bourbon. But that, to me, is traditional innovation. We're taking historic methods from other categories. We're applying it to this category. We're still young in the whiskey world, right? They do it in Scotch all the time. So that's what we can taste here. So I.W. Harper Cabernet Cask Reserve. This is going to be a 90 proof whiskey. It's 4 years old to start. Then we blend that whiskey together. We put it in California cab casks for 6 months. Pull it out of those casks. Do another evaluation of those individually and blend it again before it goes to bottling. Right? So, yes.
Shipping bourbon to California or the cask wherever you're bottling?
That's a great question. So whether we're shipping to California or shipping the casks, we are shipping the casks to us as opposed to the other way around. Because at the end of the day, the casks are lighter than the tankers of whiskey, right? So as far as that's, right? Yeah, it's a lot of air, but we're talking about fuel, right? So as far as weight load on the trucks.
Doug, what would be the MSRP on this bottle we're tasting now?
The I.W. Harper, the MSRP on this guy, I want to say is $59.99,
okay.
Right? $49.99 on the Blade and Bow.
And
right?
it's available in all 50 states?
It's available in all 50 states,
okay.
For sure. That's the really interesting part about the whole, the backstory and why I draw the conclusions and assumptions between the two. I.W. Harper, a la some other big whiskey brands in the U.S., in this country and in this state, they stopped when everybody else shut down, or maybe we stopped making whiskey or people stopped drinking whiskey, IW Harper moved to export only. The number one market for Harper has been Japan. I think it probably to this day still is. Japan.
Really?
Yeah. I started working on Harper. We launched it in 2014. That's when I started working on it. I had the privilege of doing the first launch at the Bernheim, the visitor center in Bernheim Forest with Mr. Mike Veach. If any of you all have had the privilege of meeting him, talking about the history of Isaac Wharf Bernheim. And it's just fascinating to think that when I started searching IW Harper, at that point, Instagram, every single post was in Japanese. Every single one. The brands are different. This is called the gold medal bourbon historically, because Isaac Wolf Bernheim, the way that he marketed this whiskey was even though at that point he wasn't exporting it, he entered it in every global exhibition that was available. So it won gold medals at things like the Chicago World's Fair, right? No, this is new. The one was just a bourbon at that point. Of course. Here you go.
All right, we've got another virtual question. Mr. Reynolds, are we ready?
And
All right,
Awesome.
there is J.R. Ricker out of Bloomington, Indiana.
Nice.
He's absolutely on the poor. Hold on a second. He's on the poor side of Bloomington. Trust me.
He's coming off of a great eclipse day.
J.R., you're up.
all righty. Go Hoosiers as always.
Hold on a second. This is a bourbon club, not a college basketball club. J.R., in full disclosure, he's my nephew, and I'm going to keep giving him shit if he keeps speaking up.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for doing this. My question is, first off, love Blade and Bow, and then I probably missed this because it looks like it was answered, but what is the number two state you sell out into outside of Kentucky? And then secondary question is, in order to sell bourbon, can you go to just to a liquor store and see if they can get it on the shelf, or do you have to go to somebody like a distributor and then they in hand go and sell it to the actual, like the liquor stores?
All right, let me answer the first one first. So the number two state for Blade and Bow bounces back and forth between North Carolina and Georgia. A lot of that has to do with Blade and Bow's got a great partnership actually with a magazine. It's a Southern lifestyle magazine called Garden and Gun Magazine. Yeah. And so, so they do a lot in Georgia. They've got a Garden and Gun Club is a restaurant and bar right outside of the ballpark down there. So they do a bunch there. And then it'll flip to North Carolina as well, which is a big historic state for us.
Okay.
To your second question, JR, you've asked that's a big nut to crack. It depends on your state. It depends on so many things. But yeah, if you start a bourbon brand tomorrow, although you're probably gonna be the one out on the street every single day when you're not making whiskey, you're still gonna have to find a wholesaler in pretty much every single state. And some of them, you're also then gonna have to go through the process of getting listed in that state because they're a control state, where the liquor board of the state's going to say, yes, you can come into our state. No, you can't. So there's a lot of things there. But are you doing market research? Thinking about starting your own whiskey?
Yeah, I'm thinking about starting my own. No, I'm just really curious. I was curious on how you market new states and what the process is like.
It is. As we kind of started this when we were talking about Blade and Bow. I mean, I've worked as a salesperson. I've worked with distilleries. I've worked as bar managers and bartenders and in retail. So all of it to me is very, very fascinating. There are so many small idiosyncrasies when it comes to how this beautiful category goes about and how whiskey gets to here. There's a lot to it. That's for sure.
We just finished the second one. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Cheers. I hope that answers your question.
That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Reminded me because I forgot.
So as they're getting the next whiskeys coming out to us, I think, right?
Yes.
What do y'all think of the Cabernet Cask? Oh, do we have another question?
Well, let's do one question. We'll talk about the brand, and then I'm going to come up and introduce a guest. Alejandro Triben out of Que pasa puta. Look, he's getting the celebratory. Get the hell out of here. The confetti man. What's up, Alejandro?
How's it going?
Muy bien.
So I'm here in Wheaton, Illinois, Chicago West suburbs, enjoying this view, enjoying a little bit of
Doing the same one.
enjoying this presentation. Obviously, enjoying the bourbon. I do love the Cabernet finish cask. Two things I was mentioning in the chat that I always thought that the key on the bottle was like the key to my chastity belt.
Excuse me, we're on a 5-second delay. Bill, would you please frickin' scrape that and start again?
But in a serious note, like I feel like the bourbon industry is changing rapidly. There's a lot of more players coming up with where they're buying barrels and blending. How do you see the future of bourbon in 5 years, and what do you think that Blade and Bow is going to do to stay relevant, given all the new players that are coming in?
Yeah. So I think the future of bourbon it's not in question whatsoever. But I do think the future of American whiskey is the thing that we have to really ask. Because as this bourbon category grows, which it has been growing, and we get innovation and we get things like wine barrel finishes and flavors and all of this stuff that comes out and comes out in force, I think what I would love to see more than anything else, and this may be an unpopular opinion in the state of Kentucky, but is that we see more regional identities of bourbon and regional identities of American whiskey, where, yes, this state has its identity. Although bourbon is the official spirit of the United States, we start to see how regionally things will shift and change, just like Scotland. Honestly, if 50 years from now, someone's teaching a class about American whiskey, and they do the same thing that we use with Scotch whiskeys, where they put up a big map of Scotland, and they say, from this part of the country, it tastes like this, and from this part of the country, it tastes like this, and from this part of the country, it traditionally tastes like this. That, to me, means that we've gotten to a place that is like we're catching up to them. They have hundreds of years on us as far as making whiskey. And so that, to me, means we're getting there. We're getting to a point of understanding that there's a huge difference with what the whiskey means and how it's going to develop in the Pacific Northwest as opposed to Texas, where you have the highest rate of wood interaction anywhere in the country, to Kentucky, to New York State. And so that, to me, that's the big thing for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Alejandro, thank you.
Yes.
Hold on a second. Hold on. Let's talk about, keep it on schedule. Let's talk about the profile that you got on that. What did you get?
So as far as the IB Harbor, I feel like we got some pretty good reactions here for this guy.
Very good.
Sweet. Yeah. So, I mean, yes. Dryness. Yeah. Well, let's think about it, right? This is only a 4-year-old bourbon to start, but then we're going into these Cabernet casks. So what we're lacking in age, right, and oak extraction, we gain with the wine a little bit. We're getting so what I mean by that is, like, we talk in Cabernet, we talk about tannin a lot, right? Tannin is coming from organic plant matter, whether that be oak or whether that be stems and skins from grapes. But both of them are going to give tannin, which gives astringency and gives dryness. So this wine barrel finish dryness is going to be a different version of dry, but it's still there, masking maybe some of the wood sugars, giving us more berry, right? Tree, like red fruits and tannin. What's that? Oh, yeah. So this guy's 90 proof on this one here, 45%, 91. Yeah.
I'm not a big finish guy at all, but that is really easy, and it's very nice, and it's not overpowering on the Cabernet at all. What'd you say, Glenna?
Yeah. Okay.
What do y'all think? All right. Hey, everybody in the back, everybody quiet down. Question?
Cabernet casks, right? So as far as the amount of time that the wine is sitting in there, it's not years and years and years for sure, right? Depending on wineries, but most California Cabernets, I think, are sitting in like a 6 month to 9 month to maybe a 12-month period where they're sitting in those casks, right? You can get 2 or 3 years, maybe, but that's about it. The extraction and the interaction of wine into these casks is going to stick to that surface pretty heavily. Also have to remember that you're not normally charring the barrels. For wine barrels, you're toasting, you're not charring. We don't get the alligatoring on the inside with deep penetration. It all sits on the surface. So that also means that when you put the whiskey into it and it does strip in, it pulls a whole lot out. Set time to age it in the cask is 6 months. Right, as far as the whiskey is concerned, the bourbon's going into the California Cabernet cask for 6 months. Then we blend it. Importantly, though, we blend it once for flavor. Then we divide it, put it into. So like we're getting our whiskeys, we're blending it to what is a good flavor profile, splitting that up into the barrels, pulling it out, blending it again. We just can't just trust it. Of course, nosing, sipping.
We've got a question about. Hey, Rick Barney, stand up. Stand up. The 7'2" guy with the cowboy hat, sit down, and his wife has a question. Stand up, honey.
No. No. It should be readily available. In fact, let's judge just what's at Stitzelweller on a regular basis. There's a lot of things you can't find very often. We mentioned the 22-year before. You can almost always find Blade & Bow Kentucky Straight Bourbon and I.W. Harper Cabernet cask on the shelf at the shop at Stitzelweller. Yeah.
All right, so let's do this. We're going to take a break. Doug, go sip on a bourbon for a second.
Okay.
In all seriousness, Rick Barney is a great friend of mine. Rick was first team All-State at Central in 1981. I was Trinity 81, and I held him to 47 points our senior year. Well, that's not true because I didn't make the team. Okay. So real quick, raise your hand if are you 21 months old? Because you can't be here if you're not 21. Raise your hand if you traveled to come in for the event tonight. All right, so start over here. Who over here drove in from the event from out of town? I'm not talking about St. Matthews. All right, Travis. Nashville. Tommy. All right. Jonathan Shoemaker. So let me share a little love about Bourbon Romeo here. So Derek and Travis came in for the first time ever to Kentucky. And Derek is truly one of the OGs of the club. He's been here since day one. Travis, his neighbor and great friend from Lifetime, joined right after that. They're top shelf members. They commute. Where? What? Hold on. Whoa. Did you take a direct flight or did you fly into Chicago? Okay, so you don't win the award. You still came the furthest. He flew his private plane in here. So, no, serious. Derek is a dear friend. Travis, they're dear friends of the entire club. They've been here forever. They're as active and they're as friendly. And he came in to bring his wife, who's in there eating dinner right now, to see the eclipse because they missed it in 2017. And so they hung out in Henderson, Kentucky in the Totality Zone. They saw it all. And we're so glad to have you here, guys. Really appreciate you. All right. Did I tell you about holding Rick Barney to 46 points senior year? He never scored 46 points in 3 games. Okay, so let me introduce a good friend and a guest of ours. I was asked by Tom McGuire, a dear friend, top shelf member of the club, to chair the Boy Scouts Lincoln Heritage Council's sporting clay auction. And this is the auction the night before the huge sporting clays event. All the money goes to the Lincoln Heritage Council, which is essentially half the state of Kentucky. The Sporting Clays itself probably raises $600,000. It's huge. It's at Stuart Ray's farm. It's been going on for 25 plus years. The auction last year, which is the night before, raised $95,000. So I'm the chair this year. We're hoping to raise 150. Louis Straba's on the committee with me and on the Boy Scouts board. So thank you. Anybody else? Am I missing anybody? Okay. So anyway, I asked Matt to come in and tell us about the event and tell you guys how you can participate with the auction. Come on up, Matt. Thank you. Yes, sir. Hey, Doug. Hey, Doug. Were you looking for me?
No, we scored. Some people got number 5 instead of number 3.
They don't know the differences.
Memories like making a Pinewood Derby car with their parents so that they can actually participate and have fun. So really, if Scouts, if you ask what it is, and I'm an Eagle Scout, and I have 4 kids of my own, 3 of them are in scouting, so appreciate that. It's really about fun. It's about making friends for a lifetime. It's about, do I know how to go camping and tie knots and do other things? Absolutely. But the leadership skills, what I learned by being independent, those lasted way beyond anything I learned about camping. And the memories of having a second father in my life, like my Scoutmaster, Chuck, who's up in Cleveland, Ohio, where I grew up, definitely is something that impacted me. And that's our hope for all kids in America today is scouting. If you don't know anything about it, I'm going to say 12 words. It's the Scout law. It's what every Scout learns when they're in, whether they're 5 years old or 20. It's trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And if somebody learns to live by those 12 points, they're going to be a great American. So that's what we're trying to do with scouting. In the Lincoln Heritage Council, we cover 64 counties here in Kentucky, southern Indiana, part of Illinois, and even a little bit of a half of a county of Tennessee. So we go all the way down by Fulton, where the zip codes get a little confusing by the state line, so we include part of the state there. But we love that we have 9,000 scouts currently. We'd love to have more. We are bouncing back very, very strong from COVID. It kicked a lot of youth organizations in the teeth, as most people would know. But we are bouncing back. In 2 years, we've had 31% growth, and we're in the top 10 in the nation out of 300 councils and growing. So I'll talk a little bit more about our auction now, because that's what I came here to do. Is we have these little cards, and I'm going to leave them here. I'm also going to send a digital copy to Steve so he can send it out. This is our little bourbon and barbecue auction is our theme. So as you can imagine, we're going to have a lot of bourbon. We're going to have a lot of barbecue. Because we connect this to our Sporting Clays Classic, we actually have a chance for people to buy firearms as well. So we have a lot of donated firearms that have been donated to us to auction off as well. We have a lot of experiences that you can be part of too. So if you wanted to go on a vacation, or if you wanted to have an experience of a 10-person dinner or tasting at some of the different distilleries, we have some of those in these auction items as well. On the back of this, there's a little QR code. You register for the event online. If you're not able to attend in person, there's a way you can bid online as well. So if you want to help from afar, you can. We will work on getting the items to you if you're a winning bid. And we appreciate any and all support. The auction items are being posted this week. The event is May 9th. It starts at 6 o'clock at night. It's at the Melwood Arts Center. If you're local, you'll know where that is. And we're looking forward to a fun night. The card mentions it right here, but we have incredible food and barbecue, a hosted bar, 100 plus live and silent items. And I'm really excited to see where some of the live items go. Every year we have a very, very generous person that helps us get an Oaks and Derby winner halters and gets them framed nicely. So
this year, a top shelf member of the club, Jim Perry, is one of the owners in the syndicate of Rich Strike, and he has donated a Rich Strike halter, and it doesn't happen. And Jean Cruguet, who's the Triple Crown winning winner, I haven't told you this yet, of Seattle Slew, they're going to host a table in the Turf Club, Jean Cruguet and his wife, with 4 of you. So if Matt didn't say it, and he may have, but I wasn't paying attention, the event for the auction is free. You all come for free. I didn't hear him say either. It's an open bar. Now, we don't want you to come and drink all of our bourbon for nothing. Come and bid. But it is a big event. We're going to raise $150,000. So get there, get a buzz, write a check, and help the Boy Scouts. Now listen, raise your hand and I'll share. I was a scout in the early 70s. My 4 boys were scouts. We were not Eagles. Raise your hand if you're an Eagle Scout. Bill Reynolds. Okay, only 1 Eagle. It's hard to become an Eagle. But can you imagine America today if our youth had these same principles that they're teaching to kids now? Can you imagine? It's a game changer for the world and what we want from our children and the people that are going to be the next generation. Support this. It's good for everybody. Matt, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
How I do that. Absolutely. And if you want to get a team, contact me directly. I'll help you guys 20 plays shoot. It'll be a 2-day shoot, so we have flights on Friday and on Saturday. More than happy to work with them. It's a great time. It takes about 3 hours to shoot with fun shoots and everything else. So appreciate it. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, I just said Doug, so we've only got 1 left. Because Steve, dude, we got 3 left. So we got 3 more left, so pay attention. Doug, take over.
Besides what we just gave you. No, only 1 more after what we gave you. You scared everybody. They've already gotten their next 2. And like 3 more after these 2. Listen, we do always encourage everyone to consume responsibly, right? So we make sure that these are all great samples. So what I wanted to do with this next one is I wanted for y'all to try higher proof whiskey.
Everybody listen in the back. It's loud, please. Thank you.
Do you remember when I said this whole idea of I don't love proxies for quality, you know, when it comes to American whiskey? So let me just I'm gonna take a side note for that real quick because it does really irk me. And maybe it's one of these things like we can't help it sometimes. It's what we do when we drink bourbon. But we have these proxies for quality that unfortunately they don't really align with what we're tasting. So for example, 10 years ago, what was our proxy? Ever been to the bar or been that person where it's like you walk up to the bartender and you're like, hey, what's the oldest whiskey you got? Because I just love chewing on baseball bats. Oak is my favorite flavor profile. And those are proxy for quality. It's not our fault. It's not. I blame the Scottish. Single malt Scotch forced us all to think that the higher the number on the front of the bottle, the more expensive it was, the better it was. But they forgot to tell us that they're using ex-bourbon casks in a country that's got a very mild to cold climate most of the time and doesn't have any of the things that affect our whiskey on a daily basis, right? The influence of oak is so mild and so much longer, and they're not new barrels, right? That was our first proxy for quality. The next one, which I want you all then to try with me, was the second proxy was this, and it's still happening. Looking at you all, still happening sometimes, which is coming up to the bar, instead of saying, what's the oldest whiskey you got? What is it? That's a good one. What's the highest proof whiskey you got? Because I want you to melt my face off. I don't drink anything under 130 because I don't want to taste the food I've ordered afterwards. Right? Like, you drink 132 proof bourbon, you're not tasting that Caesar salad you ordered, let alone the steak afterwards, right? Like, it's not happening. You've stripped your tongue. And you have. But this is where this comes in. All right, the next 2 whiskeys that we have, right? The next one, number 3, is well, actually, I want you to drink number 4. I'm making it real confusing. Go on the right. Everyone go on the right. I know. Listen. I want you to drink number 4. This is the Bullet Barrel Strength. Now, I actually need the bottle for this one. The Bullet Barrel Strength. Is anybody, do you have a bottle? Yeah. Okay. So, This one is batch number 7. It's 60.1% ABV. 120.2-ish.
Anybody have a math degree?
Listen,
Hey, Keys,
I'm
what?
a whiskey ambassador because I was bad at 2 things: math and staying awake in history class. So, okay, so this is clearly over 100 proof. In fact, it's 120 proof, right? Here's the thing about high proof whiskey. What it is, it's an opportunity. Honestly, that's the same thing as older whiskeys too, older bourbons. It's an opportunity for a great experience. When you find a great whiskey that's over 12 years old in this country, in this state, it's going to be pretty damn good. If you find one over 15, it's a lot rarer. You find one over 20, and it was really hard for the people that found it to find it, put it together, make it, sell it to you, and it still be good. It's not to say that everybody does that, but that's what we hope they do. That's what we love about it. High proof bourbon is there for you to create your own experience, right? Anytime I'm going to drink a high proof whiskey, it's going to be for the idea of, I want to dilute it myself. I'm going to order an ice back or a water back with it, and I'm going to drink that first sip just like we all did, right? This one here. And then I'm going to add some water, or I'm going to add an ice cube to it, and I'm going to see what that experience looks like. So now, with Bulleit Barrel Strength, all we're doing is we're giving you the opportunity to dilute it instead of us making the decision for you. That's my favorite thing about high proof whiskeys. I don't think we do that enough, is that you see these high proof stuff on the back bar and you're like, okay, well, that's how I need to drink it. No, we're giving you the opportunity to drink it however you want and still have that enough there. You can dilute it. Yes. Still a blend. Barrel strength, by definition, is going to mean, although it's not actually regulated by the TTB, right? Our standards of identities for labeling laws when it comes to all bourbons really come down to one thing. You can't lie on a label. The words we use define our categories. Just like single barrel. Single barrel is not defined by the federal government, but it's on the front of a label, and we can't lie to you, and we said it came from one single barrel, so therefore the words we used actually regulated our process. Barrel strength just means that it's the strength that came out of that barrel. But it can be the average of all of the barrels dumped. We dump the barrels for Bulleit Barrel Strength, and we do not cut it with water. Whatever, that's why they always fluctuate. Whatever strength it is when we dump them all is the strength we bottle at. So although there's fluctuation between every single barrel, when we dump them all together, the average of the lot of barrels we used for batch 7 was 60.1. Yeah. And you will. Yeah.
How many barrels typically dumped into a bag?
Well, a lot of barrels, typically for a major distillery of this size or most like large size, is typically 200 barrels within a shift, or a lot of barrels is designated as the production for one day. Now, some distilleries run 24 hours, so that can shift. If you run an 8-hour shift versus a 12-hour shift, you're going to have a different amount. For most distilleries like us, it's going to be between 200 and 300 barrels is a lot. You will dump multiple lots. For something like this, we're probably actually only dumping about 200 barrels for these lots.
Somebody's tasting it for the profile, going, oh, I need some more barrels or less barrels.
That happens after. You don't dump it for that. There's a thing in American whiskey where what you're going to do is you're going to take quality control samples along the way. So we already know if we're going to use it or not when we dump them, right? It's like, I'm going to take samples from this, I'm going to take samples from this, and you'll see if you ever walk, if some distilleries, their blending labs are pretty out in the open, people take pictures of them, they're going to have drawers of samples that were pulled by their warehouse crew, and they sit and they mark them with their own system, and they know, and they give quality controls, and then they'll go to their library.
Hey, everybody. Everybody's really loud. If you don't mind, just Lower the whisper, we appreciate it.
Don't make them turn my mic up because then it'll get all screechy.
Thank you. Wow, they practiced that all last night.
We did. We did it. We did it. But when they're blending, this idea is that we have libraries of samples and they're going to have quality control over all of them. So anytime you're going to make a whiskey, you are just making it in what they say is bench side, right? It's the spice cabinet. You're trying it once before you try to replicate. It's the same thing I say all the time. It's like you make a drink once and then you have to replicate it for a music festival. And it's like, how do I scale up, right? You're going to do the same thing with making that whiskey. In fact, one of the thing that blows my mind all the time is that, at least for our facilities, anytime blenders are making a whiskey, a bourbon, they are reducing it down to 20% ABV to evaluate, taste, and blend it. We all sit and drink it at strength that it's intended for off the bottle, but the blenders are drinking it at 20%, 40 proof. Looking for flaws, looking for the high notes that pop out that are going to stay through, right? The things you get at 20% ABV are the things that are going to resound through the whole process versus everything else that might mute down. And they're also, that's their job. And so if they want to be efficient at their job for an 8-hour shift, they don't need to be drinking high proof spirits. In fact, a lot of them do most of their evaluations by nose. Right? To be a blender in American whiskey is, I think, hands down, no knock to all the rock star distillers out there with fantastic names that do all this stuff and run these plants, but we wouldn't have consistent products on a daily basis if we didn't have amazing blenders in every single one of these facilities, because that's what makes a bottle taste the same every single time you pick it up at the store, right? So let's taste the fourth whiskey. Well, it's our fourth whiskey, but you're right. It's the third position. It's the third position here.
So we do have a math major in the
There
audience.
we go. At some point, I always need someone to keep me in line. So we're talking about proxies for quality, right? Proxies for quality in American whiskey. There is one that's happening now. At least I see it. You all might see it too. That I think has the most validity of all these calls at the bar. And that's Bottled and Bond. Right? So the Bottled and Bond this is the George Dickel Bottled and Bond, actually, right? So it's where I got my start at Cascade Hollow. The George Dickel Bottled and Bond is the most highly regulated subcategory in American whiskey. This was the first ever Consumer Protection Act on the books by the United States government as a law, protecting any consumable good for any of us in the United States. In fact, they tried this out first, and it was a precursor to the Pure Food and Drug Act. Right? So it was this idea that they said, all of a sudden, we're going to define what these things are. We tell you how to make it. We need to regulate, like we need to come up with this idea of regulating what you're putting into this so that people don't get sick and die. That's really what it comes down to. And they started with whiskey. The government did that a lot. Taxation was another one. But so the George Dickel Bottled and Bond, this one right here, this is our 11-year-old, fall 2008. Right? So it's an 11-year-old Bottled and Bond. To be a Bottled and Bond, who knows it? Let's get a little interaction. Under proof. 4 years. Bonded warehouses, which all are now.
Made in the same distilling season as barrel.
Same distilling season, same distiller, same distillery, exactly.
No rusty radiators.
And, well, some have those.
I'm
So
sorry.
let's
I'm
recap.
speaking for Tennessee.
Everybody said it. You all get full marks. One distillery, within one distilling season, it's got to be at least 4 years old, and it's always bottled at 100 proof. These are the 4 things to make a Bottled and Bond. And in fact, what's kind of fun about it is it's got to be one distiller, which means that you can't have a shift change halfway through that distilling season, right? And try to figure out who was where. But when our distiller, Nicole Austin, launched this Bottled and Bond, she did it to shut up everybody that was talking smack about Dickel, for one. But 2, she wanted to win awards. And the only way to do that was to make a bottled and bond because it's rooted in transparency. And that's why I think out of all of our proxies for quality, bottled and bond is the one that is rooted in authenticity. I don't care what distiller it is. Go ahead and drink it. And then we'll get the last one coming out.
So if we could do this while you're sipping it, we have another virtual question. Brian Hauser is in North Carolina, and I'll just give a quick introduction. Brian and then Tessa earlier, they're not in the same part of Carolina, but I met them both on the same day. They're new members, and they actually both drove independently to Kentucky. Listen up, everybody. They both drove independently to Kentucky to come to the Heaven's Door event. So they're new Big Bourbon Club members. They become good friends very quickly. Brian, you've got the floor.
Howdy, folks. Brian Hauser, Franklin, North Carolina, which is on the poor side of Western North Carolina. Thank you, Steve. I am a newbie, and I'm trying to learn as much as I can, as quick as I can. But the Solera system got me, got me interested. I'm kind of concerned. How do you break the ceiling where everybody's doing it the other way around, and you guys are going from the top down instead of from the bottom up? How's that work for y'all?
Okay, so let me. Your question is, as far as us doing the Solera system, where the youngest whiskeys going to the top,
Right.
and consecutively older all the way down to the bottom, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yep. Perfect. So here's the thing. I've been talking all day like there's a pyramid of barrels behind me. In
Mhm.
fact, at Stitzelweller, there is no pyramid of barrels because that's at a 5-level Solera system. That's really, really dangerous to just stack a bunch of barrels in a giant pyramid in a warehouse. Someone's going to get hurt. So what we actually do is we designate each one of these lots. We're going to put them up in those rick houses, in between our 18 warehouses on site at the distillery, and they will be designated with lot codes to be which levels they are. So as we fill and go from top to bottom, we start on the bottom. We pull from level 5. Go get the barrels that are level 5. Pull them, dump them all. Go get the barrels from level 4. Pull them, dump them all. We're going to pull from 5. Whatever volume we pull from 5, we pull the same from 4 into there. Barrel it back up, go. Pull 3, same amount, into 4, barrel that back up, go. Right? So it's like a leapfrog of totes and barrels from the warehouses.
Well, what kind of loss is there? I mean, if you're opening each barrel as the years go by, I mean, isn't there quite a bit of loss in that situation?
So because we're consistently filling, and this process is happening a couple times a year,
Mm-hmm.
the measured loss, as far as if you're talking evaporation, there isn't much measured loss in the Solera system because we're filling constantly. And it's only got about 6 months before we're going and filling it again. So the loss is pretty minimal there. Now, as far as loss from a transfer to transfer situation, hopefully everybody that's handling the whiskeys is really efficient and there isn't much loss from there as far as running through. But because of the way that we're filling so often, we don't have that evaporation curve happening in any rapid rate that we would off of there, where it's going to be less than 1% of anything we would lose in those barrels during the transfer and the time that it spends in each level.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Cool.
So, hey, Brian, thank you, my friend, and have a great night on the rich side of Franklin, North Carolina. All right, hey, Jack, we've got two
Good night.
questions on Facebook. Scott Ryder out of Bellevue, Washington, trust me, the rich side, says, understanding transparency of the past, what's the benefit of offering bottle and bond today?
Okay, I like that question. So the benefit of offering bottled and bond today, in my opinion, is although transparency in the past was about protecting consumers, now it's about identity. In my opinion, anytime a distillery, not even us, anybody, and we're seeing more people do it or do it again. Usually it's someone that's done it in the past. It's this idea that anytime someone's releasing a bottled and bond, it is strip back all the layers. This is who we are at our core, at our center, right? Intended profile at its core, no tricks, no games, because that's what bottled and bond is. You can't hide with anything. You're limited in the amount of barrels you can pull from one distilling season. So all you can set out to do is prove your distillery character as best you can. So there's no tricks to it. And therefore, transparency is about identity. And it's about any distillery saying, this is what this brand is at its core. We may go right, we may go left sometimes. Here it is at its center.
How much of Bottled and Bond is marketing, do you think?
I think minimal. It'll
Really?
get there. I think it'll get there. I think it's minimal, right? Because like when we make any of these any age statement whiskey, any of them, you're going, let's call it your favorite 7-year-old bourbon. It's 7 years or older, right? So you've got years and years and years to pull from. And there are some years that those blenders that are doing such a great job are grabbing 14-year-old bourbon just to add a little extra in there that they need to get it there. With Bottled and Bond, every single one of those releases is in 6 months worth of production. So not only do you have to find good whiskey, but you have to find enough good whiskey within 6 months worth of time to then bottle and be viable as a product to sell on the shelf, right? So you can't just say, oh, this limited edition is, yeah, we found, I don't know what it is, like 400 barrels and that's it. No, you have to find enough to be able to actually sell it to the whole country, you know, versus the potential of like a limited edition distillery only Bottled and Bond. But like still, that is nimble. I always liken Bottled and Bonds to this idea of your favorite bar program or restaurant that does a seasonal menu, right?
Okay.
The chef that does that.
All right, we've got a couple of questions from Facebook, and we've got another Jeff Vonderhack question, but real quick. So Tess came back on Facebook and wants to know, is it true that there are ghosts of Pappy Van Winkle at Stitzel-Weller?
I've never felt or seen anything of that sort, but I will say that it does kind of, there's a reverence to the whole place. There's a feeling to that whole place, and a lot of that has to do with the people that have worked there in the past.
Yeah. One more question from Steve Tinlin here in Louisville, who couldn't make it tonight. Are the rumors about Blade & Bow being rejected Pappy batches true, or at least partially true?
No, that is
That's a hashtag no, Steve. Dr. Steve Tinlin, my chiropractor. Hell no. Hell to the no.
So, I mean, for all of us involved with all the whiskeys that we make, like there's always going to be a separation. That's the whole point, right? So the buildings, the places, the stories, there is an intertwining of American whiskey and brands and families and everything else that's always going to be there. That's the beauty of this, right? If you've ever been lucky enough to sit with some of the great family distillers, what do they say all the time, right? They're related to one of them and they call someone else because they're all friends and they're all in the same. It's like at the end of the day, all of this that we love so much is a manufacturing plant for a consumable good. This just happens to be the only one that we all love to go and tour and talk about more than we do for other things, right? And so at the end of the day, it's people making something because they make it well, and that's it. And they all do it together, right, in this industry. Yeah, so.
Okay, let's go to Jeff first. He's had his hand up earlier.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm a little confused.
Well, we've only covered it 6 times, but go ahead.
So you're losing the age statement,
Mm-hmm.
and you're getting rid of the most expensive, oldest barrels. Is it for total output, or do the older barrels like overwhelm or dominate the newer barrels?
So yes, that does make sense. One of the benefits of a fractional blending system like this is that anytime that you're blending whiskeys together from just like a molecular standpoint, what happens is younger whiskeys will take on the
Hold on a second.
attributes-
Can anybody explain the molecular to Jeff?
Yeah.
I'm just joking.
That's why I did this. Right? There you go. So younger whiskeys are going to take on the characteristics of the older whiskeys a lot faster. So there are some things that are happening in this solution. And the second we add this to it, and the things that haven't happened to it yet are then going to be triggered to end up happening a little bit faster for them as well, right? So it's going to take on characteristics a lot quicker, which stretches everything out and allows for that consistency, which happens in sherry for Solera system, as well as in whiskey, is the idea of consistency over time. It also gives complexity, right? And so as we pull from the bottom level, it's also this idea that we're incorporating bourbon from Stitzelweller, whether that be when we started some of the last remaining bourbon to now some of the first bourbon to be distilled there. All of that comes kind of full circle in this Solera system. Right. Well, no, we still try to blend to match, because think about it. In 2015, we had 21-year-old was the oldest, but it was consecutively younger. We had 10-year-old whiskey in there that is now 8 years, 9 years older, right? So that's going to be 19-year-old bourbons, right? Consistently moving forward.
Quiet in the back, please.
Yeah.
Quiet in the back. Hey, Brian, go ahead. You're up.
What's the biggest percentage of the oldest bourbon that goes into the mix?
So he's asking me what's the biggest percentage of the oldest bourbon that goes into the mix, and it's a really easy answer. They don't tell me that. Do you want to know why? Because I sit here in rooms with you all and drink whiskey while I talk to you, and eventually I'm going to say something I'm not supposed to. So they keep it from me.
Okay.
It's hard to track. Yeah.
Hey, everybody, quiet, please. So we're at 8:30, which is normally when we end this thing, but we have one more tasting. You
One
want
more
to call it
whiskey.
quits? You want to keep going?
You want one more?
Okay. All right. Vote with your feet. If you don't like it, get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
All right.
It won't
So
offend me.
We've got one more question on Facebook. Listen up. Margarita Scouting out of Abilene, Texas wants to know, what does fractional mean when talking about older aged whiskey?
Okay. So fractional for us just simply means that we're taking fractions of each lot of barrel, right? So we're taking, let's call it, 1/5 of all of the volume of level 3 that goes into 4, that goes into 5, right? So when I say fractional there, what I just mean is the idea that we're only taking a small portion of each of those levels to go into the next one. If that makes sense.
There you go. Thank
There
you.
we go. All right, do we
Okay.
have the last whiskey?
So before we do that, real quick, we've had 4 tastes. Everybody had 4? Just real quick, we're not going to talk about them. We're going to go raise your hand with your favorite expression. Jeff, that means 1 time out of 4. No, get your hands down. I haven't done this yet. Raise your hand when I call it out. If your favorite was number 1, raise your hand. Excuse me, raise your hand only.
That's a tight ship.
Number 2, if it was your favorite. All right, number 2 is bigger than 1. Number 3. Ooh, that's looking strong. Bridget, you can say anything you want. Number 4. Well, right now, number 3 is in the lead, right? Tom, this is a duck race. No, the third, no, number, okay, hold on. Number 3 was the third pour, which is number 4. All right, so number 4, which is number 3. God, I feel like I'm from Heights Point again. All right, number 3 is in the lead. Tommy, it's a duck race. I'm not sure who's winning, who's losing. I have no idea who's on first. Love you, Lung. Okay, y'all want to do one more? All right, y'all got to hold it down. It's getting awful loud out there. Getting kind of crazy in the back there. All right, it's a school night for me, so let's keep it down so we get through this. All right, Doug, you're up.
I'm up.
Let's do it.
All right,
Number
let's
4.
close it out. All right. So the last whiskey that we've got here, just to warn everybody, because we've been talking about bourbon all night, and now we're drinking rye whiskey. So Get ready. All right. So here's what I'm going to say about this, and I'll try not to take too much time, but it's a pretty interesting one. What I brought, and this is actually something that we lined up at the last second. I was like, you know what? I'm going to bring this whiskey. This is the George Dickel and Leopold Brothers collaboration blend rye. Okay, so I'm not going to pull any punches here when I say that I honestly and wholeheartedly believe that this is the most significant whiskey to, and I don't just say this because I work for him, the most significant whiskey to be released in the past 5 years. Right? I'm not blowing smoke. Here's why. All right, this is the collaboration between the George Dickel Cascade Hollow Distilling Company and Leopold Brothers. Leopold Brothers is an independently owned and family-owned and operated distillery out of Denver, Colorado. Right? George Dickel is owned by Diageo, which is, in fact, the largest spirit company in the world. I have never seen in my lifetime of working in this industry, I have never seen equal billing on the front of a whiskey bottle, let alone any spirit bottle, between two direct competitors ever, right? We don't own them. They don't own us. Leopold Brothers, right? So here's the story behind this. Todd Leopold, who runs Leopold Brothers with his brother Scott, is a bit of a genius when it comes to making spirits in general, but he's also a really big whiskey nerd and a historian, right? So Leopold Brothers, he started out by essentially, he's the kind of guy that at the end of the day, like where we're all in this group getting rowdy with our friends and our colleagues and everything else, here at Joe's, he's going to have a nice neat pour out sitting out on his back porch or whatever he's doing, and he's going to drink some whiskey while reading pre-prohibition survey papers associated with the Taft decision when it comes to the regulations of spirits, because that's how he relaxes, right? He discovered in a survey paper that happened to become available because I think the University of Michigan was digitized by Google, like their libraries or archives one year. And he's like, let me search through there. And he found this survey paper that referenced this thing called a 3-chamber still. It was a survey that the government had done in order to start to regulate and figure out. President Taft did this thing where he essentially wrote out to all the working distillers and said, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Right? In order to then create all of these labels, all of these categories, bourbon, rye, wheat, whiskey, everything. Right? And when they did that, in those surveys, they discovered this thing called a 3-chamber still. It's not a pot still, it's not a column still, it's something completely different. If anybody wants to go into the science of it, Google it. There's like a 27-minute YouTube video, I'm serious. It's fantastic. Leopold Brothers put it out. It's a great way to go through the science of it. Here's what I will say. Historically, we used to take the page out of Scotch whiskey a whole lot more than we do now when it came to making whiskey. And rye whiskey was one of the first grains to be distilled in the United States, right? Like this is what we were using. And they would make these things called heavy-bodied whiskey and light-bodied whiskey. Heavy-bodied whiskey came off of a 3-chamber still, and light-bodied whiskey came off of a column still. And then they would blend them together. It's kind of like, who does drink Scotch whiskey in the room? A few of you? Yeah. Yeah. A couple of us will. How do any of us think that a distillery and a product that tastes like either Band-Aid tins and burnt tires or a campfire stay open for hundreds of years when just a few of us like it? I'll tell you why. It's because it's a principal component that's blended in a Johnnie Walker Black Label, the #1 selling Scotch whiskey in the world, right? Like these single malts are they were only there to be a part of this bigger thing. When we came to the US, we did the same thing. We made interesting, funky stuff blended with other easier to drink things to make things that everyone would like by pulling pieces from places. So that's what this came out to be. Todd's project, when he called Nicole down at Cascade Hollow, was to say, can we find a way to do this. Do you know anybody that has column distilled rye whiskey that would want to do this project with me? And she's like, I'll call you tomorrow. She called like 17 people within Diageo in order to get their approvals because she had to. And then they started to work on this. So go ahead and try it. I bought it today for $120 a bottle. I mean, I found it at Total just earlier, but most retailers have it. I've seen it at Evergreen down in Nulu. If you're there, you know, that's a great store. Like any of the whiskey-focused shops are gonna have it, especially if the buyer's a whiskey nerd. If you sit there with any buyer or someone that works there and talk about whiskey for more than 10 minutes, they're probably interested in buying this one. So I'll finish up here. If I can keep us in for just another second. 5. Listen, I get it. 5 whiskeys and it's real hard to hold a room. Here's what I will say. As you enjoy this last whiskey, I will tell you what I've learned as I spent time with both Nicole and Todd out in the market across the country, and that's this. Nicole's favorite thing about this whiskey is not the whiskey. It's the contract structure that she helped negotiate between a major corporation and an independently owned and operated distillery to set precedent so that other craft distillers could maybe partner with the big 3 or the big 5 or whatever you want to call them to do something like this, right? To be a part of this kind of collaboration. And the thing that Todd will say is his favorite thing about this project and working with Diageo was the fact that no one ever tried to buy it. Not once in any executive meeting did anyone ever approach him and say, you know what, this would all be a lot easier for all of us if we just gave you this money and we bought a stake in your company and then we lose all this red tape. No, because they knew it was important to Todd that one day his daughter could run a distillery if she wanted to. And she's on track to do so, I feel like. She's already got overalls and everything. So this whiskey is all about the spirit of collaboration within the American whiskey category and gives us an opportunity to see what amazing whiskey is. The last thing I'll say is this. When I say it's significant, I mean it. I mean it. When I say it's significant, I mean this. All of that stuff is great. But this is essentially because this is the only 3-chamber still in the world, and it's what we used to use all the time. This is the only way that you're ever going to say, like, this whiskey, this rye whiskey tastes like what rye whiskey tasted like when the Manhattan was invented. Right? There is nobody else that is making this because nobody else has the apparatus to do so. And so when you're talking about looking at pre-Prohibition era flavor profiles, and we've had people like Dave Wondrich actually taste this and say, yes, you actually did get it, right? You know, that's what this whiskey is. So we want to share that with you. I'll get something to wipe that up.
All right. So I've got one more question from Facebook. I've got 2 more there, and then we're going to close it out. All right. Margarita Scouton. This has a lot of 3-syllable words, so somebody help me. I heard Dickel changed their enzymes recently due to the mineral note. Mind you, I really like the Dickel Bottled and Bond. Wondering if that is just a rumor. I'm really curious how water really impacts the bourbon opposed to enzymes.
Oh, okay.
Can you feel that, Doug?
Yeah. It's molecular. No, that's everything is, right?
I think so. If it's alive.
Okay, so I have not heard that we've changed our enzymes recently. That is a question that I could field to Nicole Austin, the distiller, for sure. And our water source has been integrally the same since that distillery was rebuilt in 1959. If we're removing what you refer to as the mineral notes, what I would think is that is more of a blending flavor profile kind of project than it is a production project, because all of our corn-based whiskeys is all kind of the same at the distillery, and we don't shift them between Bottled and Bond or any of the other products. we wait to see what it grows up to become before we actually earmark it for any of the bottles. But I'm happy to field a additional email question or get an additional answer from the general manager and distiller, Nicole Austin, if we can.
Okay, Ben Gillette, you had a question. Okay. Hold on, everybody. We cannot hear.
Just stand up. So, no, they are not. So as far as the makeup of the rye whiskeys that we're using here, the George Dickel has a combination of the mash bills that we're using for the rye here. So this is 95.5, 84.88, and then the Leopold Brothers, if I'm not mistaken, is 80.20, right? And Leopold Brothers also has their own malting facility. So they're doing all their own maltings and malting their own barley there for some of the other stuff they do. So there's 3 different primary mash bills that are going into this. No.
All right. All right. Any other questions? Ben, did you have one or were you just helping out? Thank you. Any other questions? Jonathan, last one.
Okay.
While I was back here, I tasted each one individually, and I personally did not like either one of them. But I went ahead and I actually mixed them together. One being a bottle of bond and a nickel, and one being a full, and obviously one is Kentucky bourbon and one is a Tennessee whiskey. And when we blended those two together, not only me, but a couple of the other ladies at the table thought it actually tasted better.
Okay.
So now you have a bottle of bond product, which is obviously hard to get because you have so many steps to keep it in bottle of bond. But what happens if you have bourbon that is really close to being bottled and bond, but didn't make, maybe it was distilled 3 days later, it's not 6 years.
Yeah.
You can't consider it a bottled and bond product. But and have you ever thought about maybe doing a bourbon with bullet and then you Dickel and mixing them together and trying something new out of that?
Yeah.
Because I've tried them like that, mix those two together, and we both thought they made each other better. And we were actually wondering if that might be something you had looked at before. Or
Okay. Yeah. So as far as there's kind of 2 things there, right? Number one, the idea of I gather part of the question is the idea if you're taking a bottle and bond, something classified as a bottle and bond and something not classified as a bottle and bond, but close as far as how it's hitting, blending them together, can you still call it a bottle and bond? I don't think we can because this thing is higher. We would have had to reduce this first.
Hey, Jeff Vonderheim, your ride's here. Sorry, that was a joke.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Okay, every
Sure.
question has a 30-second limitation.
So that's my fault. I gave him a follow-up clarification. I will say this. Yes, we are always thinking of everything. So things like if you've seen there are some orphan barrels out there where we've distilled stuff that was made in Kentucky, blended with something that was made. In fact, the most recent orphan barrel to be released has whiskey from Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee all blended together. The Indigo's Hour. Right? So we've done things like that. Now, whether it's primarily from Bullet or not, I would do it. You could do it. It sounds like you can start to blend on your own, though, if you're already starting to figure that out. So that's perfect. Yeah, there we go.
All right, everybody. All right.
Everybody thank Doug Cragel. Thank you, guys. What a great night. We'll see you again in June. Have a good night. Thanks, man. It was awesome.